Hello, my name is Patricia Ferreira Lopez, and I am the Women and Children's Ministry Director here at the Ontario Conference for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'm so happy that you could join us today, and if you could please take a moment to like or subscribe our videos so that we can continue to share them with the world. Today we're looking at a subject that is difficult for many to discuss, but important to highlight. It is the subject of domestic sex trafficking. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have a movement called End It Now, which is to bring awareness to domestic violence. And sex trafficking is a vein of that. We are honored today to have a special guest named Lynda Harlos, who is an author and an advocate, and more importantly, a mom, who is going to share her journey with us. Lynda, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Patricia. It's an honor to be here.
We are so happy to have you here, and we'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into this and tell us about your journey.
All right. Well, I'm a mom of 4 and been married 38 years. My daughter ended up going to a party when she was 17 that we didn't know about, and she got gang raped, and she became pregnant due to that rape. A lot of her friends did not believe that the pregnancy was due to the rape and started ostracizing her. Part of the reason is because of the people who were at the party were also some of the people at the school. And so it was conflict of interest for a lot of them. So it was just easier just to make her look like the bad guy. And one day across the smoking area, she sees this guy that she has not seen before, but he's standing with some people that she does know. And then later that day, he contacts her on social media. And it took her a while to kind of be okay with, talking to him. But then eventually she came upstairs and said, "Mom, can I go out to coffee with him?" My red flags instantly went up because I'm wondering what young man wants to date a girl who's pregnant and who is the black sheep of the schoolyard, which at that time, I didn't know that part. But so the whole point of him instantly put a red flag up to me, but it was this thing, well, you know what? She's pregnant. She's got a lot going on. So I let her go. My husband was in the parking lot. I was at McDonald's. So, it wasn't a huge, big date. It was just a coffee thing. Mm-hmm. And he slowly just integrated his way into her life and eventually started fulfilling the needs that were missing in her life, which was some kind of a social life, because we were not aware of the ostracization that was happening. So he was somebody other than family that cared about her. Mm-hmm. And then he started proving that he was going to be around regardless of the fact that she was pregnant, then offering to be a father figure, started finding out what her dreams and hopes were, started promising all those things to her.
And so vulnerable she was in this moment.
Very vulnerable, mm-hmm. Right? And again, we only knew part of what was going on with all of this story because she only told us what she really had to tell us about the pregnancy and the rape. And even the police didn't believe her story because there was nobody that would corroborate the story for her. Mm-hmm. So she really felt like her social life had fallen apart. And as teenagers, their social life is everything.
Right.
So he filled a void for her.
Right.
And eventually started breaking down her healthy relationships in the background, mm-hmm. started causing a lot of mistrust between her and her family, which was her foundation. And a long story short, convinced her eventually to move out with him. And shortly after she moved out with him, he started trafficking her. So he used that mostly by threatening her son. So he had been born and they had lived with us for a while, but he was less than a year old when she moved out with him. And that was really the catalyst for making her comply. And, so to us in the background, we were concerned and thinking it was, I hate using the word just, but abuse. Mm-hmm. Had no idea what domestic sex trafficking was.
Okay.
So to us, we just knew it was not a healthy relationship, and we didn't have any idea what to do about it. So after 3.5 months of being trafficked, she called me up one day, and she said, "Mom, come pick me up, no questions asked, all right?" Mm-hmm. So I got in the truck and went and picked her up, no questions asked, brought her home. She stayed with us again for a little while. She eventually did move out on her own as a single mom. She did even eventually get married, but it took her 10 years to come and tell us about the trafficking because she didn't know that that's actually what had happened to her.
Wow.
She thought she was had just let her morals slip. Somehow it was her fault. And so it wasn't until she started volunteering for victim services here in the area that a police officer was there one day talking about what sex trafficking is. And every point that he talked about was exactly what had happened to her. So when she figured out that's what it was, yep, check mark, absolutely. That's when she went to town and really did the rest of the self-healing. I mean, she'd been working on it for 10 years, but she didn't know what she was working on. She just really felt like somehow she was lacking because she allowed that to happen to her, that she allowed her morals to slip. But then she finished the rest of her healing, got some coaching and some counseling, and she wrote a lot of poems, and she loved the water. So she knew how to do that part of self-healing. And then she went to work and she started educating in schools here in the area
as well.
To be an advocate as well. And so she did that for a couple of years. So then I got on board and it's like, okay, so what did we miss? Like, what could we have done differently? Why did this happen to our daughter? So I went to town. I have a parenting talk show. So I went to town and started interviewing a bunch of people and started realizing all the things that we had missed. And so that's really why then I became a domestic sex trafficking and abuse prevention educator, because I don't want anybody else to put their head on the pillow at night with naivety being the only reason someone they love or know gets abused or trafficked.
Right. Thank you so much for your bravery to do this. It's such a difficult topic, isn't it?
It is.
Now, you talked about the domestic trafficking. Could you tell us the difference between domestic trafficking and international trafficking?
So international trafficking looks very much like the movie Taken or Sound of Freedom.
Right.
It's where somebody goes to another country or gets kidnapped and goes to another country and then is forced to stay there and can't come home.
Okay.
And is either sold for labor or for sex. Domestic sex trafficking is where there's no movement needed whatsoever. So they're not taken even to another city typically. My daughter was sex trafficked 11 blocks away from us.
Wow.
And we had no idea. So typically it happens, like 38% of domestic sex trafficking happens with an intimate partner. 27% happens by a family member.
Wow. So it can be happening in your own home.
Absolutely, it can be happening in your own home. Siblings sometimes will traffic each other. And sometimes it's not an organized syndicate crime like international trafficking typically tends to be. Sometimes it's just some person who's taken that abuse one step farther and is now exploiting that by selling their girlfriend or selling their sister for drugs or for rent money, and that's a form of trafficking, even though it's not a syndicate or organized crime. In my daughter's case, it was organized. There was a third-party person. So domestic trafficking and international trafficking typically have a third-party person who takes care of the appointments, the traveling back and forth, the finances, and that's when it becomes an organized crime.
Right.
So domestic sex trafficking could be either organized or not organized, and somebody just exploiting somebody for some extra cash.
Right. Now, Lynda, as a mom and, your mama heart when you went through this, and as a Christian, as someone, a believer, how was your faith journey with this? Like when you were going through this, your daughter coming home and this kind of all spilling out, what kind of hit did that take on you, and how did that affect your family and your walk with God?
Honestly, you know what? I struggled with my walk with God when I was in my late 20s, just because of some things that happened to my own personal family growing up. But when I got to the point where my relationship with God was my relationship with God, it wasn't my upbringing or how I was raised, I started having kids right around that time. And then I suddenly started to be able to realize that the God that I was questioning can't control everybody because of free will, just like I can't control my kids. Right. And it solidified my relationship with God in such a way that this did not rock me. In fact, this just went, okay, so this is an evil in the world I did not know about, I don't like, and I'm going to combat. So that's what my faith in God did. It made it so that I'm here today. As far as my family goes, I have a couple who are still struggling with their faith. But overall, each of them have been through something that's been very traumatic for them. And it is one of the ways God will kind of be there for them and pull them back. And for my daughter who was trafficked, this was it. I mean, she she was a typical teenager, lying and stealing and doing some of the stuff she shouldn't, trying to sneak out to parties, which we now know she did do quite a bit that we weren't aware of. But she is now probably out of the four of them, one of the strongest ones in her faith.
Right.
And it's because she sees that through it all, even though this happened to her, God was there with her every step of that way, even to the point where, when she said, Mama, come and pick me up, no questions asked. Mama, come and picked her up, no questions asked, and became that safe place that she needed, because she forgot she had it until she really needed it.
Just gave me goosebumps.
So she is, as a family, that was the second part of your question, we don't talk about it when we have big family dinners. It is not part of our family discussion. We have all talked about it individually. We've all talked about it once as a family, and we all came to the consensus that if anybody wants to talk about it, they know what I do. They know that I do this, but they don't ask about it. They don't talk about it. And with my daughter, the only time I bring it up to her is if I'm looking for permission from her to do something. So when I wrote the book, I asked her to read it because I didn't want it to go out there without her reading it.
It's her story.
It's her story. I mean, it's my story too, but it is mostly her story. I'm the secondary victim. She's the victim.
Sure.
So even when I applied for TED Talks, I said, "Are you okay with this?" "Yeah, Mama Bear, you keep going." And that's all she ever says. "Yeah, Mama Bear, you keep going."
That's brilliant.
So she knows the fight. She knows why I'm doing it. So it's
Wow.
this is all powered by a higher being. God is a big part of this, or I wouldn't be doing this. So.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to take a little break, and then we will come back and continue on with Lynda's story.
You might be asking, who are Seventh-day Adventists? Commonly known as Adventists, we are a Christian movement established in 1863. We have 28 fundamental beliefs and more than 20 million members. We also observe the seventh-day Sabbath. Worldwide, we have more than 162,000 congregations. We serve countless communities with our education institutions, with 2 million students. And 198 hospitals around the world. And it's all because we love Jesus.
See the smiles. See the joy. See the friendships. See leaders. See the outdoors. See the learning. See the scarves. We are the Pathfinders. If you are between 10 to 15 years old, join a Pathfinder Club.
Welcome back. We are seated here today talking to Lynda Harlos, who is an advocate, an author, and a mother for domestic sex trafficking. She's just been telling us her story if you just tuned in. So Lynda, thank you so much for sharing your journey with your daughter and what's happened, and as well as your faith journey. I'm wondering if you can tell our viewers a little bit about signs to look out for with your child. If they could be in this scenario, and parents may not realize that you didn't know that this was happening. So now you've got that 20/20 vision. What does that look like, and what tips can you give to parents?
Okay, well, first of all, everything I mentioned, all of these things could be things that just a typical teenager might be doing anyway.
Right.
So I will talk you through a few of them, but on my workshop I go through them much more extensively. But if you suddenly see a drastic change in your youth, and again, sometimes their hormones on a teenager will make them just kind of go crazy, but it should at least warrant a conversation so that you can kind of see what's going on. If their hair and nails seem to be getting done a lot more, especially if they really can't afford to do that,
Right.
that's a sign that somebody is grooming them and getting them ready. if they can't find their identification. So if their passport or health card or driver's license, if they have that, birth certificate is missing, because traffickers quite often will take that so they can't flee. So even though it's domestic sex trafficking and they're here in their own city, they don't want them to get up and leave and flee from them. And as well, they take their identification to take away their identity. So it's part of what they do. If they have a tattoo they can't explain, because traffickers also will tattoo their girls, and they do that for two reasons. Number one, to make them feel like cattle, like branding them and making them feel less human. It's easier for them to get them to be controlled and do what they want them to do. And secondly, so other traffickers will know that she's taken.
Wow.
So those are the harsh ones. Then you have just the simple ones that they can't. If you cannot really determine where they're going, they can't give you timelines on what they're doing or who they're with. They change their friends. They just are in their phone more than they were before, or they're doing sexual things that you've never seen them do before, or they get a chronic disease or a sexually transmitted disease. Those are all little signs, and all of those could be happening just because they're a teenager and they're exploring and they're testing, who knows?
Pushing the boundaries.
Pushing their boundaries, but they're all worth a conversation. And the hard part is that as a parent, we want to go in there and protect them. So sometimes we come in very harsh, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Or if they do disclose something, then we put our hands on our hip, that whole attitude, well, you know better than that. And that has instantly taken away their safe place.
Shut them down.
And it will shut them down. And so, yes, as a parent, we want to protect them, but one of the best ways we can protect them is to be their safe place. So be that place where we're not criticizing or judging them at all when they come and tell us something, when they disclose something that's horrible that's happening to them or something that they don't understand. And just say, so, okay, how can I help you? What's really going on? Let's get to the bottom of this. They already know, especially if you're the one that raised them, they already know the moral boundaries that they've probably crossed.
Right.
They don't need it shoved down their throat at that particular moment. They need you to be there, and they need you to be their safe place so that they actually can come and tell you what's going on. So if they're going through one of those red flag things and you come to them with the right attitude, you're going to probably become their safe place. Because here's the problem. If we're not, a trafficker might be their safe place. And that's quite often how they get their victims.
Wow. So we named the show, Predators Among Us, and indeed, these people are predators. What are these predators looking for?
They're looking for anybody whose needs are not being met, whether those needs are real or imagined. Because lots of times children think that they need something that they don't need. Their needs are different than what we know their needs to be. And those can be tangible or intangible things. So it could be they just are feeling unloved, undervalued, or it could be that they're just jealous of somebody's boyfriend. Somebody's got this cute boyfriend and they don't, or they have the newest iPhone and they don't. So it could be anything that a person perceives as a need that's not being met. And a trafficker will find out what those are. And they do that by just simply hanging around with them, chatting with them online, talking to their friends, figuring out what makes that person tick and what it is that they're missing in their life. And so in my daughter's case, she was looking to build a social life again because all of her friends were ignoring her, and she needed somebody to believe her. So the minute he said to her, I believe you got raped, he had her, because that's what she needed the most.
And already that was so traumatic.
It was extremely.
So she's creating, she's in this trauma space. Yes. And then from that, going on to have a child as a young teen mom. She was a teen, right?
She was 18,
and so that alone, trying to process that. So all of these things, and someone swooping in, and I'm assuming he was very charming.
He was.
Very engaging, and was able to, find out the things that she needed to hear and just hone in on that.
And traffickers are very good at understanding, like they read the room better than anybody else I know.
Sure, yeah.
And so he knew that if he was just quiet around us and kind of sat in the background around us, He wasn't really looked at as a threat. But with Samantha, when she was relaying some of the stories to us, yeah, he was most definitely charming and gave her everything that she needed and promised her
That love
all
bombing.
yes. So the
Stockholm syndrome.
That's
yes,
it. Yes,
yeah.
that definitely applied. The trauma bond that happens there. She still struggles with it to this day. Sometimes, if he's brought up in conversations, she'll say to me, "Yeah, it's still there." So they get a hold on what it is that they need.
Right.
And if we're not spending time with our kids on a regular basis, just doing regular things, talking to them, getting them to open up to us, they're opening up to somebody else.
So pursuing that relationship with your child is so important, right? Creating those connections, leaning into those difficult conversations
Yes.
in a non-judgmental way, which is hard.
Very hard. I did that wrong a lot because
Yes.
I didn't realize what I was doing.
Right.
Right. To me, I'm like, I'm still putting that foundation of a moral code in them,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going, well, you did know better than that, right? I mean, and and I never looked at it from their point of view, realizing that, okay, well, no sense talking to her. So
Right. And she just shuts down, and then that's it. And then she's even more vulnerable.
yes,
Right?
yes, absolutely.
Okay, so here's the scenario. This has happened now. This is maybe happening with families out there who are watching this. God forbid, but it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to parents who are journeying through this right now? They're in the middle of this and they want to help their child. What would you say?
Okay, well, we're going to quickly just touch on if you think your child is being trafficked,
Right.
don't rescue them. Don't try to rescue them.
Why?
One of two things could happen. You could either endanger them,
Okay.
because if a trafficker feels threatened, they may just literally pick up with your child and go,
Okay.
or they may actually physically do harm. Or they might physically do harm to you or one of your other family members, or traffic somebody else that you know, almost as a get back at you kind of thing. So it's really important that you don't try to do this. There are professionals out there who take care of that part. But as far as if you're thinking they're getting groomed, the things that you can do is really start making sure that you're educated. Educated on what abuse looks like, educated on what sex trafficking looks like. There's all kinds of resources out there on YouTubes, on podcasts. I mean, I'm being interviewed all over the place. A lot of the people I work with in this field are all being interviewed. So there's tons of information out there on this. Educate yourself. Like, that is the number one thing you need to do, is find out what's going on. In particular, online. Online landscape is changing weekly. Like,
Right.
even an emoji can change its meaning from one week to another.
It's true,
And
yeah.
suddenly become very sexual. So we need to be staying on top of that, and that's a full-time thing. Like, it's never going to stop until your children. I mean, I still think about it, and I'm educating myself on it, and so it's an ongoing thing. So education is the number one thing, and then number two is just making sure that you are doing whatever you can to keep those lines of communication open, and or going to get help from organizations that are local with you to give you the resources that you might need. So one of the resources I can offer is my workshop. So quite often when somebody takes my workshop, they'll come back the next month with their child.
It's called Parent with Purpose. Is that the one?
It's my Parent with Purpose is my website.
Your website. Mm-hmm.
And there's a free workshop every month that I do, and I do it different days, different times. But a lot of people will bring their child back, and as long as you've seen it once yourself, so you know what's in there, you know the content, and you're comfortable with bringing your child back. I don't go into a lot of detail on purpose, because this is a tool for parents as well, to come back with their child. And it's broken down in 3 segments. What is sex trafficking, and then the vulnerability piece, and then teaching age-appropriate consent. So they can come back during those segments with their child. So that's one resource that they've got, because it just starts that conversation going.
Right.
And then just honestly sitting down and asking your child, what do you think consent means? What do you think sex trafficking means? And doing those things so that you can see how much they already know, and then bringing it up that way. And then the last thing I would really suggest any parent do is that they start a list of people that they trust, and get the child to write a list of people that they trust. And when there's somebody on there that is on both lists, they go to that person and say, can you be a safe place for her as well? Where when and if she's struggling with something, and she just doesn't want to come to mom or dad for whatever reason,
That is a great
she's
idea.
got one more lifeline that she can go to that's safe.
Our village.
our village, our tribe. Yes. And we're showing the child that we are your safe place.
Right.
Because we're saying that, but then we're saying, but it doesn't have to be me. Like if you, for some reason, don't want to tell me something, and I hope you do, and I hope I have the grace to handle this properly, but if you don't want to, for whatever reason, we want to give you somebody else to go to. So that's another resource that I think every single parent should do with their
Every
children.
family should set up, even for other scenarios as well.
Absolutely.
Because, and maybe this is a bit of a tough question, but I've been watching some of your podcasts and all the work that you've been doing and doing my homework a little bit. And one of the things that you mentioned about your daughter is that she's very independent, has always been, dare I say, I forget the word that you used. Tenacious, strong-willed.
Yeah.
I know I have one of those myself at home. What happens when you're there and she's in that situation and he's telling her all the things to make her feel loved, to make her feel seen, and she's so vulnerable, and you just know that there are red flags going up everywhere? How do you handle that? Like, what do you do to get through to her? And I think you answered it a little bit with this list. Is there anything else that you would add to
the
that?
list? I mean, that should be done prior, hopefully. I mean,
Sure.
that should be done now. Like, that's the thing that, sit down with dinner or whenever it is you spend time with your family and do it, that part now. As far as somebody who's already in the middle of something like this, or in the middle of abuse, or in a situation where they kind of feel like you're not their safe place and they're going somewhere else.
Right.
They are strong-willed. I mean, Samantha didn't tell us an awful lot of what was going on. The only thing you can do besides pray, because I did a lot of that.
A lot of praying, yes.
Is to just try to keep those lines of communication open. So in my book, I was constantly texting her, constantly doing what I could to make sure she was aware that that line was still open as far as I was concerned.
Right.
I was never going to shut that door on her. Come on over for coffee. Baby girl, how you doing? How's my grandson? Anything. Like, I would be texting her, not pestering, but texting her. And every text ended with, I love you, baby girl.
Constantly connecting.
And she did come over almost once a week for coffee. And I think that is probably one of the bigger things that made her realize, when it got right down to it, and she was thinking, why am I here?
Okay.
That she thought, I can call mom. I think that was one of the reasons. It's just we kept those lines of communication open. So it's a tough thing to do when you've got an independent child who doesn't want to tell you anything.
Right. Absolutely. And just before we go to break, could you just briefly touch on, so if a child or a young person has gone through this, what are the steps that they take towards healing?
Again, a lot of
and
prayer.
Getting out of it, yes.
Getting out of it. Typically, you do need an organization that will be standing behind them to fulfill all the things that they need that the trafficker was filling. So that's our number one problem, is that if a trafficker is filling all their needs, typically they're not going to leave. So if they need a roof over their head, if they need a job, if they need daycare for their child, the only reason Samantha was able to leave was because she knew that she could come home, and she was able to stay there until she got back on her feet again. Most people do not have that. They do not have that support system somewhere where they can actually count on that.
Right.
And so if they can't get all their personal needs or their whatever needs it is that they have fulfilled, they're not going to leave the trafficker. So one of the best things you can do is to go to the resources that are locally in your area and ask them, so what is it I need to do to help? And even the law enforcement, quite often, especially after a child is 18 years, because they're considered an adult, you cannot go in and take them out. You cannot do it. They have to do it of their own free will. And if in their own free will you haven't provided those needs, they're going to go back.
Thank you, Lynda. We're going to take a little break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about a little more resources that we can look into to continue to help victims of domestic sex trafficking.
Welcome to College Park Elementary School, a cornerstone of Christian education since 1903. Located on the picturesque campus of Kingsway College, we have a long-standing tradition of academic excellence and spiritual growth. At CPES, we provide a comprehensive education from junior kindergarten to grade 8. Our commitment to diversity and inclusion creates a multicultural setting where students from various backgrounds feel welcomed and valued. At CPES, we maintain a rigorous academic curriculum that exceeds the expectations of parents looking for a quality elementary school in Durham region. Join us at College Park Elementary School, where we are committed to excellence in Christian education. Enroll today and become part of our growing family.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, I'm Patricia Ferreira Lopez, and I am the Women and Children's Ministry Director here at the Ontario Conference for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we have our guest here, Lynda Harlos, who's been telling us her story of domestic sex trafficking with her daughter. And we've been talking about these predators among us. And you were going to touch on a few resources, but before we do, Lynda, one thing that struck me that we didn't talk about is this predator. What happened to him?
Nothing.
Nothing.
So unfortunately, she was trafficked for 3.5 months, but in those 3.5 months, she did not get what they needed in order to be able to prosecute him, which is fear of life.
Fear of life.
So
how do you prove that?
That's kind of really what I asked, because so when she is sitting in her hotel room and she's getting waterboarded because she won't do what the client wants.
She got waterboarded.
How on earth does she take out her phone and take a picture of this?
Wow.
So how does a victim, and they are victims, they're not prostitutes by choice.
Right.
How does a victim get proof of what's going on? And they can't prosecute if they don't have proof. So that's the biggest problem, and that's the main reason why. The second reason is because it was almost 10 years by the time she figured out that's what had happened.
Right.
And after 7 years, there's virtually no chance of...
A statue of... Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you could still try, but chances are... And of course, all of that was happening during COVID, so the court systems weren't open anyway. And unfortunately, he didn't even, get a slap on the wrist, because he ended up putting his name on the birth certificate of my grandson's...
As the father?
As the father.
Wow.
And so he also had partial custody of my grandson for a while and was going there every other weekend. And of course, we still didn't know about the trafficking at this point, but Samantha did, and she hadn't told us. So she knew she couldn't go to court because he threatened her. He said, "I'll tell him what you did." So this wraps in,
the blackmail.
Yes,
and...
it's like poison ivy that just wraps in her life, and in one way or another. I mean, her hands were tied for so many reasons to be able to do anything she really wanted to do, even get the job she wanted to get. So it really...
It taints everything, yeah.
It taints everything, especially when it was in the dark, when she didn't talk about it. I mean, it was the shame. I mean, you asked me that question. Yeah, it was the shame for her because she thought it was her own fault. She thought she had consented. She thought this was her moral slipping. So there's the shame part of that.
Which is huge.
Oh,
yes.
Shame and guilt, I live with it.
It controls everything, doesn't it?
I live with it.
And so when you're living in that darkness of shame,
Yes.
which we know doesn't come from God, right?
Absolutely not.
And so when we're living in that, it's so hard to come out of that and to share the truth and bring that light, shed that light, to step out of that darkness, yeah.
But once she did, that's when the final piece of her healing really did happen. Mm-hmm. And then she was my example. And it was she's my hero. I was able to follow in her footsteps. And what we decided to do was to turn this pain into purpose. And that's why she went and educated for a couple of years in the school. And I do what I do. So no, he wasn't prosecuted. No, nothing happened to him. But it's difficult to do. We live in a world right now where the victims are usually the ones that are getting charged instead of the traffickers or instead of the third-party person. So we're trying to change that law right now. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make it so that somebody isn't getting charged for prostitution, but instead catching the John or catching the trafficker and leaving the victim alone and doing what we can to help them actually be able to come out of that lifestyle, which is difficult to do. But they don't get prosecuted near enough. If they do get charged for that, typically a police will try to charge them with something else as well, right, because typically the trafficking charge doesn't stick.
Wow.
Yeah.
One thing that you said that really struck me is turning, pain into purpose.
Yeah.
Pain into purpose. If only we would all embrace that journey, and that's so admirable and so courageous of you, because what a difficult journey it has been. But what the enemy meant for evil, you have taken it into something that is good.
Yes.
For the greater good.
For the greater
right?
good, yes.
So speaking of the greater good, resources and things that families can have access to, you're going to expand on that a little bit. Tell us more, Lynda.
Okay, so I have, my website is, and I'm constantly adding new resources, but my website has all kinds of different places around the world.
So parenting with purpose.
Parentwithpurpose.ca. And I know,
just parent.
Or
with
just
purpose.
type in my name in Google. It'll come up. So
Right.
I'll make sure Lynda's with the Y though. And so my website is loaded with resources of different organizations for different countries. Locally here, we have Victim Services, which is one of the best as far as dealing with sex trafficking. I know Durham Regional Police here has a whole task force for human trafficking.
Right.
So I know they really work diligently towards it here in the area. And the reason is because we are close to the 401. And Ontario is the number 2 province in Canada for sex trafficking.
Wow.
So Nova Scotia is number 1.
Nova Scotia
is number 1, and Ontario is number 2. So honestly, there's all kinds of resources. A Covenant House, there's one here in Toronto, there's one in Vancouver. There's millions of organizations out there that will either help go and rescue. There's vets for rescuing kids, I think it is, down in the States. Like, there's all kinds of them. They're all on my website. There's way too many to mention. So there's organizations that will help rescue. There's also organizations that will help you once they've been rescued. And then there's the resources that are typically there for the healing piece that's needed, coaching, therapy, different support systems that will get them back out into the world in a healthy way and teach them healthy relationships as opposed to unhealthy. Because when you've lived through something like that, you need teaching on what a healthy relationship really should be, because we tend to get into cycles and we tend to head down the same paths unless we've broken those chains of what's happened to us. So those resources are all there. There's all kinds of them. If what you're looking for isn't on my website and you need more, they're more than welcome to email me. I'll do what I can to try to help them with what it is they're looking for.
Wonderful. And I think what we should do here is make sure to add your website onto our own website under Women's Ministries, AdventistOntario.org, and link them together so that we can unite forces to add along with our other resources that we have on there on AdventistOntario.org. Also, so speaking of us uniting forces, as a church community, as a church organization, what can we do to help families and victims? What do you think?
That's the biggest question I always have anybody come and say to me, so what can I do to help?
Right.
And the best thing that you can do to help, awareness is what's needed. So if I'm out here fighting this fight to bring awareness, just keep reposting my post. Just keep reposting any post you see out there where people are talking about it. Like if you're going on LinkedIn or Facebook, or you found something somewhere and it resonated with you for whatever reason, just repost that. Send that out to at least 10 people.
Right.
Because that one person in those 10 might be the person that you actually save from this. So that's honestly, and that doesn't cost you any money.
Right.
That just costs you a little bit of time. But if something resonates with you, and I truly believe the Holy Spirit will go, yeah, this is the one. Like, repost this one or repost that one. Like, it's not about making sure you repost my stuff. It's about making sure that people are educated and are aware. So that's the number one thing a community needs to do. They need to open their doors to people who are speaking about it and have them come in and talk about it.
Because it's a hard conversation.
You know what? Nobody wants to talk about this subject, and that's what traffickers are counting on.
Right.
And so I will stand in that gap, and I will be the person that will defy them.
Amazing.
And I will talk about it. And I will go into churches and talk about it. Because I think, we tend to think that this kind of thing doesn't happen to us. And I can tell you, that was one of the things that kind of struck me, is like, we're middle class. We've got 4 kids. I was a stay-at-home mom. I volunteered in the church all the time. I was volunteering at school all the time. I was with my kids 24/7. How did something like this happen to a family who's doing everything right? And evil has,
Evil infiltrates everywhere.
Evil will go where evil will go. And the only way that we can stop it is to be educated, and that's what we missed.
And shed light
Yep.
on that darkness.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Wow. So your daughter, where is she today? How is she doing?
Well, she was over the other day. We have at least once or twice a month, we have breakfast and hot tub together.
Wonderful.
And my grandson is actually, my husband's with my grandson right now. They're playing snooker, and then they're going to make a campfire. So they're in our lives a lot. They're really doing well. She does have a job. She is trying to become a police officer. It's a bit of a journey because being a single mom, they needed solid background in work, which was difficult for her to do for the first 5-6 years because of having an infant at home.
Sure.
So, but she's been working now almost 3 years at one job, and so she's going to go back and try again. So that's her end goal. She really wants to be a police officer and fight the evil in the world because she's been through enough of it, but she is happy, she's content, she's in our lives a lot. And
she's in a healing space.
She is definitely in a healing place, and she is my hero.
Amazing, amazing. Lynda, I want to thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us, for being an advocate. I just commend you for your courage and your strength to do this and to be that light in this dark space among these predators and to stand there as a strong mom and a strong woman. We're just so grateful. We just pray you forward, pray your family forward.
Thank you.
The blessing and continued healing. And we are here to support. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today and listening to Lynda's story. If you want to know a little bit more about her and the work that she does, check out her website at parentwithpurpose.ca. And if you want to know a little bit more about us, you can check out our website at adventistontario.org, where we have many resources for your spiritual growth. May God continue to bless and protect your families as you journey with us.